To work with the Zorn palette means to work with a limited palette. We're not going to use all of the colors in the rainbow. We're going to use just these four. It's a very traditional palette for mixing flesh colors. And it's a great way to start learning about flesh colors and how to manage them. So we've got titanium white, yellow ochre, cadmium red, and a new player, which is ivory black. And you've all heard me say before that you should never use black. We don't use black in this class. Black kills color. And all of those things are true. But the new way we want to think about black is you shouldn't use black until you learn how to use black. And then you can be more successful with your use of it. If you really think about this palette, we've got white, which makes things lighter. That's basically its function here. But then we've got red and yellow, two of the primary colors, and then black, which we think of as the opposite of white. But ivory black is a very cold black. And so if you really want to think about our primary colors, we've got all three. We've got yellow, red, and what we're going to use for our blue, which is the black. We're going to take advantage of the coldness of that black to create our blues, which will give us greens and purples and all kinds of things. You'll actually be kind of surprised how many different colors you can mix from this. So these are our four main colors. Before we want to start painting our portrait or working on flesh tones, we want to pre-mix some of these together to create a wider palette based off of these four colors. And then we're going to create another set of colors off of that, which is just an adjustment towards lighter values, which means adding white. There's almost an unlimited number of colors you can create with these four colors. They do tend to be more earthy. They aren't going to be vibrant. For example, I'll show you how to mix a green, but it's not going to be a vibrant green. It's going to be a fairly low-key green, and that's what we want for flesh tones. And in the end, what we're going to be doing, if you think about these two as the warm colors, these two as the cool colors, we're really going to be mixing for flesh tones that have a balance between warm and cool all the way across. So let's mix. One of the rules in here in this class has been dark to light as a general way of working, and so I'll just follow that when it comes to the mixing. The first color I want to mix is a purple. So I'm going to take some of the black and some of the red. What we're doing is pre-mixing colors before we do our painting. What that's going to help us with is we'll end up with several puddles of color that we can select from when we're working on the portrait. They're already ready to go, so to speak. So I want to mix it thoroughly, just like we did in the color mixing painting that we did earlier this semester. Make sure there's no streaks in it, and just create a nice deep tone there. So we've got a purple. Next I'm going to make a bit more of a deep red. So this time more red than black. You can see those two side by side. Hopefully there's not too much glare on here, but you can see that we've got a deep dark red. Think about that. Maybe that's the color that's going to work in your shadows. And then we've got this deeper red right here that might be one of those transition colors as we come out of shadows. Let's mix a green, so a little yellow ochre, a little bit of black. Not every black on the market is a cool black. There are warm blacks and cool blacks. Ivory black is a cool black, and so when we mix it with colors, it does tend to cool them down. And we're taking advantage of that today using this palette. You can see, like I said, it's not a vibrant green. It's a very drab, kind of olivey green. And if you compare that to the gray of my palette, the under part of my palette, you can see that it's still a fairly dark color. So now I've got a warm version for shadows and a cool version for shadows. I can play with both of those within the flesh tones I'm trying to create. Moving out of green, let's go into blue. So a little bit of black, a little bit of white, just those two. And you're going to see, again, not a vibrant blue. More of a gray blue. So very toned down, very neutral, but still very cool. And again, this blue, fairly dark on the value scale. So I've got two warms and two cools that are from middle value on down to kind of even darker. And I can take these darker, of course, by adding more black to any one of them. What I want to avoid is just using straight black at any point. So if your photo reference has a ton of really deep dark shadows, don't fall into the temptation of just going to straight black. We want to create some kind of chroma inside that black, which means adding some of the other color to it. And now I'm going to make just a bit more of a yellower green, so a warmer version of green. A little black, and this time a bit more I said a bit more. There we go. You all know that yellow ochre is a fairly earthy color to begin with, so any vibrancy in this painting is really going to want to come out of that intense red. I want to take that even further. What I'll do, I basically remixed that color. I'll just take a little bit of it and really punch up the warmth. There we go. That's what we were looking for. So that little bit of black with that yellow ochre still keeps it a fairly yellowish color, but you can see it lowers the intensity of the yellow ochre and cools it off a bit. I like to keep my puddles fairly concise in a small space so they don't run into each other too much. All right, a couple more colors I want. Kind of think of these as your base flesh tones. Now this is strictly Caucasian, but you can mix other ethnic flesh tones from this as well. What we're going to go with is a bit of red and just a little bit of the yellow. We really want this one to stay mostly in the red family. And what this will do is give us kind of a pink flesh tone. There's a little more yellow in this one. The cadmium red, you all figured this out when you were doing your color mixing project. It's close to orange. And so it's a fairly warm red. I find when we add the yellow ochre, we get, again, a slight cooling and a de-intensifying of that color that kind of brings it into a fairly deep pink. And then the last one I want to do is the opposite of that. I want to start with a majority of yellow ochre and add just a little bit of red. And this time create more of an orange flesh tone. Let that yellow ochre dominate the red. I don't know how this looks on the screen to you because of the lighting in the room. But I'm hoping that you can see that there's a pretty big difference between those two. Now they're close, but not super close. I'm gonna add more yellow ochre to that. There we go. Now we're starting to see kind of this very pale orange. Now, if you go onto YouTube or onto the Google, there are just tons and tons of videos of people doing this, and I certainly didn't invent it. In fact, I just started using this about a year ago when I took a portrait painting workshop with an artist up in Fort Collins named Zoe Frank, and she taught us to use this palette, but she didn't invent it either. It's been around for a long time. And if you do a Google search, just Zorn Palette painting, and look in images, you'll find a ton of portraits and figurative paintings that use this palette. So you can see at this point, from these 4 colors, I've expanded my palette and my color vocabulary. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I've almost doubled my color vocabulary at this point. Next thing I want to do in this pre-mixing stage is mix a lighter version of each one of these. So I'm just going to take a little bit. I'm going to do this one over here. Hopefully that's still in the frame. Yeah. And take that about 50-50 with white. And remember, white lightens the value of things. It's one of the fastest ways to lower the intensity of a color. The other fastest is to add its complement. And the other effect of white is that it cools colors down. And so you can see that really warm, dark color is now becoming this cooler, pale purple. Now I'm doing this mixing a little bit big, and what I mean is I'm taking up a pretty good chunk of my palette, but it's mostly because I want you to be able to see these colors. When you pre-mix your colors to do your portrait painting, you can really just work in a smaller puddle and with smaller amounts. You can always remix these. The formulas are very simple. It's just 2 colors to get to these, and then the addition of white for the next layer. So you don't have to worry about running out of a color. You know you're going to be able to get back to it again. So you can mix relatively small batches of these. But you do want to get all of these going. So you've got your mid-tones, your dark tones. You've got warm and cool versions of all of them. And then what we're doing now is creating a lighter version of this. And what this is going to translate into for us is a new palette. Imagine when we had all of our vibrant colors. I don't know if we can see this up here still. No. When we had our full palette for the last painting all across here, we're just creating our own new palette here. And so you can think of each of these little puddles as what you would have squeezed out of the tube. You're just making your own version of everything. What that'll mean for you later is quick and easy. You just reach for the color you need. It's already there. You don't have to struggle and look for it. We will end up mixing all kinds of variations of all of these colors together, but we're going to try and keep these puddles alive so we can always reference back to them. And we'll mix more of them as we go when we're actually working on the painting. But this is just what maybe looks like a lot of work ahead of time. Will save you time as you work on the painting. This pink, it still looked very red. Sorry about the beeping. I've got a timer going because I'm smoking a brisket out on the grill. I want to make sure the smoke stays going. So it'll beep a couple more times before I finish this. But what I was saying is I described this as a pink red, and I know that it didn't look that way yet, but you can see as soon as I add white to it, it really goes to that kind of peachy pink color. And then when I take this more orange version of the basic flesh tone, you can see how that calms down. It almost gets a silly putty color to it. Now, if I had a bigger palette, I might mix an even lighter version of each one of these as well. And so I've got my primary colors. I've got white to adjust value. I've got my dark version of each color. And then I've got my middle tone of each color. And if I wanted to, and like I said, if I had a bigger palette, I would mix a lighter version of each one of those. But hopefully you can see relatively quickly I can mix up a fairly complex set of warm and cool colors that all kind of rotate around what flesh color is. And so I've set myself up for success in starting to apply color to my painting as I move forward. So let's take a look. I've got my pre-mixed colors, and I've got a painting that I did a while back that used this very palette to exclusively. And so if you kind of compare what's over here pre-mixed and you look at the colors here as best you can, again, given the lighting we have, you can see where a lot of these colors would kind of align or match up. Now, one of the things I hope you're noticing and saying, wait, John, that doesn't make sense. These colors don't match these. The biggest difference that I hope you see right now is that this has way less intensity than these colors. Now, these didn't look very intense when I first mixed them on the palette, but now that you see them in comparison to a painting, hopefully you can see that there's way less intensity of color here than there is here. Well, what does that mean for us? It means that these colors are straight out of the tube colors, if you think about it, high intensity colors. We need to be mixing combinations of all of these to come up with our flesh tones. And you know that the more colors we mix together, the less intense they're going to be. So the mixing of all these colors together is what will achieve what's happening over here. But what I really want you to notice is where some of those green tones are being used, some of those blue tones are happening. There's the purples. There's a really cool purple here. Some of those more intense reds and oranges coming off of this side of things. And then a lot of this stuff has more white and more neutrality to it. But what we're really seeing is this relationship. I'll get in a little closer for you. Of warm versus cool. So each little patch of color that you see sitting next to each other, I may not be changing the value, the lightness or darkness of the portrait in that space, but I'm probably adjusting the temperature. So do I need this temperature to be warmer or cooler? And then I refer back to my palette, like, okay, if I need it cooler, I'm gonna reach for these cooler puddles to mix into this color. If I need it warmer, I'm going to reach for those warmer tones. But all of the colors that happen inside this painting are coming directly from this palette and mixtures of all of these colors into each other.